The day had finally come. The day that would determine the future for a young boy and his family. His parents had been fighting for what felt like forever, but now it was all coming to a head. The courtroom was packed and the air felt thick with tension. This wasn't just any hearing. This was about deciding who would have custody of the boy. His entire life, his home, and his sense of stability were all about to change forever. The boy sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. He was only 12 years old, but today he felt like an adult, sitting in the middle of something far bigger than he could truly understand. The judge, who had seen countless cases like this before, was calm and collected, but the boy could sense that even the judge felt the weight of the moment. The room buzzed with quiet whispers as lawyers flipped through their papers and tried to prepare their final arguments. His mother, sitting near the front, was pale and shaking slightly. She had spent weeks trying to convince the court that she was the better parent, that she could provide a more stable and loving home for her son. She had always been a caring mother, but after the divorce, the constant stress had begun to take its toll on her. She had good intentions, but the cracks in her own life were becoming hard to ignore. The boy could see it in her eyes. The desperation. She was worried. She wanted so much for things to work out, but deep down she feared that the hearing wouldn't go her way. Across the room sat his father, confident as ever. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, giving off an air of someone who was sure of their victory. His father had always been the stronger, more commanding presence in their home. He was the type who believed in taking control, in making things happen the way he wanted. In the past, he'd always made the decisions, and his decisions were final. Even after the divorce, his father had continued to maintain a sense of authority over the boy's life. But this time it felt different. The boy could sense that things were not as easy for his father as they once were. For the first time, he saw a little bit of uncertainty in his father's eyes. The boy hadn't spoken much about how he felt, not to anyone. It wasn't that he didn't want to share. He just didn't know how. He loved both his parents, but he hated the way they fought. He hated how they seemed to tear each other down at every chance. He hated how they dragged him into their arguments, even when they didn't mean to. He was tired of it all. He was just a kid after all. He didn't have the words to explain the confusion, the sadness, or the anger he felt, so he stayed silent. He stayed out of it, but today was different. Today everyone was looking to him. Today his silence was the loudest thing in the room. The courtroom was filled with nervous energy. The judge finally looked over to the boy and asked him in a calm voice, "Do you want to say anything about who you would like to live with?" The boy shifted in his seat. He could feel all the eyes on him. The judge's eyes, his parents' eyes, the lawyers, and even the strangers in the room, all waiting, hoping for something. It wasn't just any question. It was the question that could decide everything. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what to say. His stomach twisted into knots. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't know how to choose. He didn't want to choose. He just wanted things to go back to the way they were before. Back to when everything felt simpler. But that was impossible now. There was no going back. His mother turned to him, her face filled with hope. She was looking at him like he was her lifeline. He knew she needed him to speak up, to say that he wanted to live with her. She needed to hear those words, to know that all the pain and sacrifice she had gone through was worth it. But deep down, the boy wasn't sure what would be best for either of them. His father, on the other hand, was more focused. He had already made his case. He had made sure the lawyers were on his side, that the facts were in his favor. He didn't need to say anything more. All he had to do was wait for the boy to say what he already assumed would be said. The boy tried to block out the thoughts racing in his head. He focused on the table in front of him. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge. He wanted to cry, to yell, but he didn't. He had to stay calm. He had to think. But the truth was, he wasn't sure what he wanted. He wasn't sure what would be best for him. The silence in the room stretched on. No one moved. No one said a word. All eyes were on him, waiting. The weight of it all pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. The boy wanted to shrink away from it to escape, but there was nowhere to hide. He glanced up at his mother again. She was biting her lip, her eyes wide with anticipation. She was so sure he would choose her, that he would speak up for her. The boy didn't know how to make her feel better. He didn't know how to ease her worry, her fear. His heart hurt for her, but he couldn't fix it. Not with words, not with anything. Then his gaze shifted to his father. His father's face was set in a determined expression. but the boy could see the subtle signs of stress there too. His jaw was clenched, his hands folded tightly on the table. The boy knew his father didn't want to lose him. He didn't want to be the one left out. He didn't want to be seen as the parent who couldn't provide, who couldn't give his son the life he deserved. The boy's chest tightened. He felt trapped. Between two people he loved but also felt distant from. They were both so focused on what they wanted, on what they needed, that they couldn't see him. They couldn't see how hard it was for him, how confusing it was to have to choose between them. The silence dragged on for what felt like hours. The boy felt like he was suffocating, caught in a moment that seemed to last forever, and then finally, when it seemed like he couldn't bear it any longer, the judge spoke again, his voice soft but steady. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready," the judge said. "Take your time." The boy breathed a small sigh of relief. The pressure didn't feel so heavy now, but he still didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he'd ever know. The only thing he knew for sure was that he was tired of being quiet. But speaking up felt like it would change everything. And he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. For now he stayed silent. But in his heart something had shifted. The boy had realized that he couldn't stay quiet forever. Maybe not today, but one day soon he would have to find his voice. It wasn't just about the court hearing. It was about something deeper, something more important. It was about learning to stand up for himself, to speak the truth even when it scared him. But for now, the boy sat in that courtroom, silent, trying to make sense of a world that seemed to be spinning out of his control. And as he sat there, a small, quiet part of him knew that this moment, this hearing, was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would change everything. The boy sat still in the witness box, his legs shaking slightly beneath him. He didn't look up at anyone. Not his parents. Not the judge. Not even the lawyers who were busy scribbling notes trying to prepare their next arguments. His hands rested in his lap, fingers tightly curled as if holding on to some invisible thread that might pull him through the moment. The silence around him seemed to stretch endlessly, thick with anticipation. The boy's eyes remained downcast, staring at the cold wooden surface of the witness stand. He could hear the sounds of the courtroom, the shuffle of papers, the quiet murmur of voices, the occasional cough. But those sounds felt far away, as if they belonged to a world he wasn't part of. Inside his mind, it was as though a fog had settled, blurring everything around him. He could feel the weight of all those eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to look up. Not yet. His mother sat in the front row, her face pale and drawn. She'd been up all night, pacing in her apartment, her thoughts racing 1,000,000 miles per hour. What would he say? Would he choose her? She had spent the last few weeks convincing herself that he would, that he knew how much she loved him and how hard she had tried to make things work for him. But as the time passed, the anxiety began to build. What if he didn't choose her? What if, in his silence, he chose the other side? Her heart raced. She knew he was struggling, that he was caught in the middle of something far beyond his understanding, but she couldn't help herself. She needed him to say it, to say that he wanted to stay with her, that he needed her more than anything else in the world. The boy's father, on the other hand, sat across the room with a calm and collected demeanor. He seemed perfectly at ease, as though everything was going according to plan. He had made sure everything was in place. The best lawyer, the most compelling arguments, and the calm confidence that came from knowing he had always been the dominant force in their family. He didn't doubt for a second that his son would choose him. After all, he had always been the one to provide. He had always been the one to make things happen, to get things done. And now it was time to reap the rewards. But even as the boy's father sat there, his arms crossed, his face set in its usual confident expression, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was trying not to show it, trying to keep up the facade, but something about today felt different. Something about his son's silence unsettled him. He had expected the boy to speak up quickly, to voice his opinion, to tell everyone that he wanted to stay with him. But that didn't happen. The silence was thick, like a barrier between the boy and everyone else in the room. It was almost as if the boy was not just silent, but withholding something important. The father's gaze flickered to his son, trying to read his expression. But the boy wasn't looking at him. His eyes were fixed on the table in front of him, his fingers pressed so hard into his palms that they had turned white. The lawyer representing the boy leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "Would you like to share anything with the court?" she asked, trying to coax him into speaking. The boy shifted uncomfortably in his seat but didn't respond. The lawyer tried again, her tone softer this time. You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but if you'd like to, we're all here to listen. Just tell us how you're feeling. We won't judge you. But still there was no response. The silence in the room grew even heavier and the tension began to rise. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the boy to speak. The judge, sitting at the front of the room, cleared his throat softly. He had seen cases like this before, cases where children were caught in the crossfire of their parents' conflicts. But even he was beginning to wonder, why wasn't the boy saying anything? Why hadn't he spoken up by now? Was he too scared to choose? Or was there something deeper at play? The boy's mind was swirling. He had never felt so lost in his life. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell everyone what he was thinking, but the words wouldn't come. He was afraid. He was afraid of hurting his parents. He was afraid of what would happen if he said the wrong thing, if he chose one and not the other. He had always been quiet, keeping his feelings to himself. Even before the divorce, he had learned to retreat into his own little world. His parents never seemed to understand him fully. His mother, who was always busy with her own worries, didn't have the energy to sit down and talk to him the way he needed. And his father, though well-meaning, had always been more focused on work than on what was going on inside his son's heart. Now, in this moment, everything felt impossible. He couldn't choose. How could he? How could he choose between two people he loved but who could never seem to get along? Every time he thought about his mother, he felt a pang of guilt, remembering how hard she had worked to keep things together after the divorce. But when he thought about his father, he felt a wave of sadness, remembering how things used to be, before everything fell apart. The boy's heart raced as he tried to understand his feelings. He wasn't sure where the lines were anymore. The love he had for his parents felt like it was stretching in 1,000 different directions, pulling him apart. He didn't know where to go, what to do, or what to say. His mother was watching him closely now, her eyes wide with expectation. She had been waiting for him to speak, to say what she so desperately needed to hear, but he couldn't give her that. He couldn't promise her that he would choose her. Not yet. The boy glanced up at the judge, whose eyes were kind but firm. He could tell the judge was patient, that he wasn't rushing him to speak. The boy's gaze flickered over the room again, and for the first time he realized that everyone was waiting for him. They were all waiting for him to make a decision that he wasn't ready to make. The weight of it felt suffocating. His mother shifted in her seat, her face full of worry. She opened her mouth to speak, but the boy saw the brief flash of fear in her eyes, and something inside him tightened. He didn't want to disappoint her, but how could he choose? It was then that something shifted within him. A tiny, fragile thought began to take shape. Maybe it wasn't about choosing one or the other. Maybe it wasn't about picking sides at all. Maybe the answer wasn't something he could say with words. Maybe, just maybe, the answer was something he would have to find in his own time, in his own way. But that realization didn't come easily. It wasn't like a sudden burst of clarity. It wasn't as if everything made sense in an instant. No, the boy still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on him. But he had started to understand something that had eluded him before. This wasn't just about his parents. It was about him too, about what he needed, about what would be best for him, and that was something he didn't have an answer for yet. The minutes ticked by and the silence lingered. The boy sat still, lost in his thoughts. His heart ached and his head felt heavy. He had no idea what would happen next. He didn't know what the judge would decide or what his parents would think. But one thing was clear, something had changed in him. The weight of the decision, the pressure of everyone watching him had cracked open something inside of him. Something that had been locked away for so long. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The boy didn't speak that day, but as he sat there silently, he knew that the silence itself was telling them something. He just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The courtroom felt even more suffocating as the silence stretched on. The boy sat there, still, his heart thudding loudly in his chest. He had been asked to speak, to share his feelings, but the words felt trapped inside him, as though they were stuck in a place he couldn't reach. His eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of him, trying to ignore the burning sensation in the back of his throat. The boy wasn't sure how much longer he could stay quiet, but at the same time, he couldn't bring himself to break the silence. His mother, sitting just a few feet away, looked at him with eyes full of hope and fear. She had been watching him carefully ever since the hearing began. She had watched him struggle with the decision, watched him squirm in his seat trying to figure out how to voice what he was feeling. Her heart broke every time he glanced her way, her hopes rising with each passing second only to crash down again when he looked away, lost in thought. She needed him to speak. She needed him to say what she so desperately wanted to hear, that he wanted to stay with her. But as much as she wanted him to choose her, she also knew how unfair it was to ask him to make that decision. The boy was only 12, still so young, and yet he was being asked to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. She could see the strain in his eyes, the way his body was tense like a coiled spring just waiting to snap. She knew he was hurting. She knew he was afraid. And deep down, she understood that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about him, too. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the boy's father clearing his throat. He was sitting on the other side of the room, arms crossed, watching his son with a look that was harder to read than usual. He had been confident at the start of the hearing, certain that his son would speak up for him, that he would choose him. After all, he had always been the one to provide, the one who had the bigger house, the more stable job, the more secure future. In his mind, that should have been enough for the boy to choose him. But now, as he watched his son sit there in silence, the father felt a sense of doubt creeping in, like a shadow he couldn't shake off. The father's gaze shifted between his son and the lawyers, his face betraying a hint of concern. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to make things go his way. But now, with his son sitting there not speaking, he felt a sense of helplessness that he hadn't expected. He wasn't used to this kind of uncertainty, and it unsettled him. The boy's silence, which at first seemed like nothing more than a sign of fear or indecision, was starting to feel like something more, a refusal to choose, a quiet protest against the choices his parents had made for him. The boy's lawyer, a woman who had worked with him for weeks, leaned in and spoke gently, trying to guide him. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but if you want to, we're here to listen. Just tell us how you're feeling. You don't need to make a decision right now. Just speak from your heart." The words were kind, but they didn't seem to make a difference. The boy had been told over and over again that he needed to choose. He had been told that his voice mattered, that his feelings were important. But every time he thought about speaking, a lump formed in his throat. What if he said the wrong thing? What if he disappointed his parents? What if his words tore their already broken hearts into pieces? His mind felt like it was racing in 1,000 directions at once. On one hand, he loved his mother. He loved her with all his heart. She had always been there for him, even when things were hard. But his father had always been strong, always been the one to take charge. He had been the one to fix things, to make sure they had what they needed. He had a way of making everything seem possible, even when the world around them felt like it was falling apart. The boy knew both parents loved him, but in that moment, he felt like he was being torn in two. Each parent was pulling in a different direction, each one hoping he would pick them. He could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at him, hopeful, expectant, as if his decision would somehow fix everything that had gone wrong between them. But the truth was, he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know what was best for him, let alone what was best for them. The minutes ticked by and the pressure began to mount. Every passing second felt like an eternity. The boy could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. The whispers of the lawyers, the soft murmurs of the audience, even the ticking of the clock on the wall. They all seemed so loud in his ears, drowning out everything else. He just wanted to be somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from this courtroom, away from the decision that had been placed on his shoulders. But there was no escaping it. This was real. This was happening. And it was happening because his parents couldn't make things work. It wasn't his fault, but somehow it felt like it was. If only he had said something sooner. If only he had told them how he felt before everything had gotten so complicated. But now it was too late. Now the choice was his. The burden was his, and it was a weight too heavy for him to bear. His mother, sensing the growing tension, looked at him again, her face full of worry. She had always been the one to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay, even when things didn't feel okay. But today she couldn't offer him that reassurance. She couldn't tell him everything would be fine, because she didn't know if it would be. She didn't know if the boy would choose her, or if he would choose his father. She didn't know what was going to happen next, and that scared her more than anything. His father, on the other hand, had grown more impatient. He was starting to feel like the boy was purposefully avoiding the decision. He was trying to be patient, trying to give him space, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that his son was making this harder than it had to be. Why wasn't he speaking? Why wasn't he just saying what everyone expected him to say? The boy's lawyer, seeing the growing frustration in the room, took a deep breath and stood up. She spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Your Honor, I think it's clear that the boy is under an immense amount of stress. He's struggling to make this decision, and it's understandable. He's a child. This isn't something that should be rushed." The judge nodded, his expression softening as he turned his attention back to the boy. "Take your time," he said gently. "There's no need to hurry. We're all here to listen to you when you're ready." For a moment, the boy felt a tiny spark of relief. The judge's words were like a small lifeline, a reminder that he didn't have to figure it all out right now. He didn't have to make the choice that day. But the relief was brief, because the doubt quickly crept back in. What if the choice wasn't just his to make? What if he wasn't the one who could fix things, no matter how much he wanted to? As the courtroom settled back into quiet, the boy's eyes slowly drifted upward, looking at the faces around him for the first time. His mother's eyes were filled with something. Was it hope or fear? Or maybe both. His father's face was unreadable, but the tension in his jaw said it all. He wanted answers. He wanted the boy to speak. But the boy wasn't sure he had the answers, not yet. The silence wasn't just between them. It was inside him too. It was the silence of not knowing how to fix things. The silence of being caught between two people he loved, but who couldn't seem to love each other. The silence of not having the words to explain what he needed or what he felt. The boy sat there still, quiet, not ready to speak. And yet in that silence, something important was happening. He was beginning to realize that sometimes the hardest thing isn't making a decision. Sometimes the hardest thing is knowing that you don't have to make the perfect choice. Not yet. Not today. And with that realization, the weight on his shoulders seemed just a little bit lighter. The courtroom had fallen into an uneasy quiet. It was as though everyone was waiting for the boy to make the next move, but the silence stretched on, thick and heavy, as if time itself had paused. His hands, still tightly curled in his lap, began to sweat. Every breath he took felt labored, as though the air around him was thicker than usual. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, not like this. It was one thing to be heard in class or at home, but this was different. This was a decision that would affect not just him, but everyone around him. And he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. His mother sat up straighter in her chair, her body tense as if every muscle was waiting for something to happen. She kept her eyes on him, but he couldn't meet her gaze. It was too much. The look in her eyes was filled with hope, but there was also a kind of pleading. She was waiting for him to speak, to say the words that would ease her pain, that would confirm everything she had hoped for during these long months of uncertainty. But he couldn't find those words. He couldn't find a way to tell her how he felt, because even he didn't fully understand it himself. Across the room, his father's expression was more difficult to read. He was still sitting with his arms crossed, but now his posture had stiffened, his jaw tightening every so often. It was as though he was trying to hold on to control of the situation, control of himself. The boy could feel the tension in the room growing, like a balloon slowly inflating. The pressure was building. It wasn't just the decision he was facing. It was the weight of everyone's expectations, everyone's hopes, and the fear of what would happen if he made the wrong choice. But what was the right choice? For the first time, the boy wondered if there even was a right answer. There was a part of him that wanted to speak up, that wanted to tell everyone that he didn't want this division, this battle over him. But he couldn't say that. He couldn't find the courage to speak those words aloud. His heart ached, his mind a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't put into words. It wasn't that he didn't love his parents. He did, more than anything. But love, he was learning, was complicated. It wasn't just about picking sides or choosing one person over the other. He realized with a deep, sinking feeling that no matter what he said, no matter who he chose, things wouldn't go back to the way they used to be. And that realization made his chest feel tight. The boy's lawyer, sensing the growing tension, stood up and addressed the judge again. "Your Honor, I believe we need to give the boy some time. The pressure he's under is considerable, and this decision shouldn't be forced. He's trying to process something very complicated, and I would urge you to consider that in the next steps." The judge nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful as he looked at the boy. He had seen cases like this before, cases where children were caught in the middle of their parents' struggles. He had seen the toll it took on them, the confusion, the fear, the overwhelming pressure, but still he couldn't help but wonder how much longer the boy could stay silent. Would he ever speak? Was it possible that he just didn't know what to say? The boy shifted in his seat, trying to find some comfort in the cold wooden bench. The seat seemed too big for him, as if he didn't belong there. His hands felt clammy and he wiped them on his pants, his mind racing. He couldn't seem to stop the thoughts that kept swirling in his head. What if they hate me for this? He thought. What if I make the wrong choice and I lose them both? His father had always been the strong one, the provider. He had always been there, but in a different way, always focused on work, always in control. The boy respected him, but sometimes he felt like he didn't really know him. His mother, on the other hand, had always been the one to comfort him, to listen when he needed to talk. She had always been there for him in the way a mother should be. But in the past few years, she'd been struggling too. She was tired, worn out, and trying to hold it all together. There were days when the boy could see it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of everything she was carrying. He hated seeing her like that. But at the same time, he didn't want to choose. He didn't want to make things worse. His mind kept spinning with questions. What if I say something wrong? What if they don't understand? What if I hurt them? The boy realized that the decision wasn't just about where he wanted to live. It was about how to keep both of his parents happy, how to make them both feel loved and needed. But how could he do that when he didn't even know what was best for himself? Suddenly, he felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He wanted everything to go back to how it was before the arguments, before the divorce, before everything had changed. But that wasn't possible. He couldn't go back. And as much as he wanted things to be simple, they weren't. Life wasn't simple, not anymore. The boy's lawyer noticed the change in his expression. She had seen this before, the internal struggle, the heavy weight of a decision that was too much for a young mind to carry. She walked over to him gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing great," she said softly. "Take a moment, breathe. You don't have to do this all at once." Her words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that he didn't have to have everything figured out right now. He didn't have to solve the problem in that moment. For the first time, he felt a tiny bit of relief. He didn't have to speak right away. He didn't have to make the perfect decision. But even as the weight began to feel lighter, the uncertainty remained. His mother watched him, her heart aching. She knew he was struggling. She knew that he wasn't ready to speak, that he didn't know how to say what he was feeling. But she also knew that the longer he stayed silent, the harder it would be for him. She wanted to reach out to him, to hold him and tell him that everything would be okay, but she didn't know if that was true anymore. Could she promise him that? Could she promise him that this would work out? That he would be happy no matter which parent he chose? The boy glanced at her, and for the briefest moment their eyes met. He could see the pain in her expression, the way she was holding herself together even though everything inside her seemed to be breaking apart. His chest tightened again. She was hurting, but so was he. He wanted to make her happy. He wanted to make everything right again, but he didn't know how. As the room remained still, the boy finally took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling slowly. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants again and closed his eyes for a moment. He couldn't fix everything. He couldn't take away the hurt. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe he didn't have to make a choice in that moment. Maybe, just maybe, he could give himself time to figure it out, to find his own way through the chaos. And as he sat there, still silent, he realized that the hardest part wasn't choosing between his parents. The hardest part was learning how to choose for himself, how to stand up and say what he needed, without fear of disappointing the people he loved most. His mother watched him, the tears welling in her eyes, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. She knew this wasn't easy for him. She knew it would take time. But even as the silence held, even as the weight of the room pressed in, she understood one thing. Her son wasn't ready yet, and that was okay. It was going to take time. The courtroom felt heavier than ever. The boy could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. The walls seemed to close in a little more with each passing second, the sound of the clock ticking almost deafening in the quiet. His mother was sitting there, her gaze fixed on him with eyes full of hope. Yet there was something else behind them, an uncertainty, a fear of what was happening, and of what would come next. Across the room, his father sat with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The boy's lawyer was still standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as if offering him a silent reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment. The boy felt trapped. He had been sitting there for what felt like hours, his mind whirling with questions, doubts, and fears that he couldn't seem to sort through. He loved both of his parents, but they couldn't seem to get along anymore. And now here he was, stuck in the middle of it all, unable to make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone he loved. For so long, he had believed that love was simple. When he was younger, everything had seemed clear. His mother and father were a team, and the world was a safe place where everyone had their role to play. His mother had been the one to comfort him when he was sad, to read to him at night, to cook his favorite meals. His father had been the one who taught him how to ride a bike, who picked him up after school, who showed him how to be strong and never back down from a challenge. But now things were different. The world wasn't simple anymore, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. He could feel his heart racing in his chest, his throat tight, his hands clammy. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence that seemed to fill the room, but he didn't know what to say. Every word felt like it would make things worse. Every time he opened his mouth, he imagined the disappointment in his parents' eyes if he said the wrong thing. He was too afraid to speak, too afraid to make the wrong choice. It wasn't that he didn't know what he wanted. Deep down, he knew that he wanted both his mother and father in his life. He didn't want to choose one over the other, but there was no middle ground, no easy way to fix things. There was no magic solution that would make everything okay again. His parents weren't getting back together, and the reality of that had started to sink in. The boy understood that the divorce was final, that nothing would be the same again. But what he didn't understand was why he had to choose. Why couldn't he just have both? Why did everything have to feel like a battle? The boy's lawyer, who had been watching him closely, gave him a gentle nudge. "You're doing great," she said softly. "But if you're ready, we can talk about how you're feeling. You don't have to say anything you're not comfortable with, but we're here to listen." Her voice was calm and reassuring, but it didn't make the boy feel any better. In fact, it only made him feel more isolated. He had already said so many things to the people who mattered to him, but none of it seemed to help. Nothing felt like it could make this situation better. How could he explain the pain he was feeling? How could he put into words the fear that he might never feel truly happy again, no matter what choice he made? His mother looked at him with such a longing in her eyes that it made his heart ache. He wanted so badly to tell her that he loved her, that he wanted to stay with her, that everything would be okay. But how could he? It wasn't that simple anymore. He could see the pain in her eyes, and it made him feel guilty. But the truth was, he didn't know what would be best for anyone. He didn't know if living with his mother or his father would make him happier. He didn't know if things would ever feel normal again. The boy's gaze shifted to his father, who still hadn't spoken. His father was a man of few words, always had been. He didn't express his feelings easily, and when things got tough, he became even more distant. It was hard for the boy to understand his father's emotions, to figure out what he was really thinking. But one thing was clear: his father wanted him to choose him. He wanted the boy to pick him as the parent he would live with, as the parent who could offer him stability. But how could the boy choose that over his mother? She needed him too. The pressure of it all was starting to feel unbearable. His lawyer spoke again, her voice steady and soft. "I know this is a difficult time for you, and it's okay to not have all the answers. You don't have to solve everything today. Take your time. You don't need to rush this decision. You can think it through." The boy nodded slowly, but the words didn't comfort him. They didn't make the weight on his chest any lighter. He was so tired, tired of being strong, tired of pretending like he knew what was best. He just wanted to escape, to run away from this courtroom and all the emotions that came with it. But there was no escape, not now. The minutes dragged on. He could hear the murmurs of the lawyers in the background, the quiet shuffle of papers, the soft click of the judge's pen as he took notes. But none of that mattered to the boy. It was just background noise to the storm inside his mind. He wasn't sure how much longer he could sit there without completely breaking down. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice calm but firm. "It seems the boy needs more time to make this decision. We will adjourn for the day. We will reconvene in a few days." A wave of relief washed over the boy, though it was short-lived. The judge's words had taken the pressure off for now. But it wasn't as if the problem was solved. He still had to face the same decision again in a few days. The thought of it made his stomach twist. He wanted it to be over, to stop the feeling of being torn between his parents, but deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be that simple. As the courtroom began to empty, the boy felt an unexpected wave of exhaustion. He hadn't realized how much the past few hours had taken out of him. He felt physically drained, his body heavy as though he had run a marathon without even moving. His mother stood up and walked toward him, her footsteps tentative, like she wasn't sure if she should come closer. She knelt beside him and placed a hand gently on his knee. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice shaky, "it's okay. You don't have to make a choice right now. We're all just trying to figure this out, and I want you to know that no matter what, I'm here for you. I love you." The boy looked at her, his heart aching as he saw the tear streaks on her face. He knew she was trying to reassure him, but the words didn't make the pain go away. His eyes burned and he looked down, not wanting her to see the tears that were threatening to fall. He wanted to tell her that he loved her, that he would always be there for her. But the truth was, he didn't know how to make everything okay. He didn't know how to fix this. The boy's father stood up then, his face more strained than before. He looked at the boy, then at his mother, and for a moment the boy could see the conflict in his father's eyes. He could see the pain there too, the desire to make things right, the desire to have his son with him. But the boy knew that things wouldn't be easy. They couldn't go back to how they were. Not now. As they left the courtroom together, the boy walked slowly, feeling the weight of the decision still pressing down on him, but he also felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't about making the perfect choice. Maybe it was just about taking things one step at a time, allowing himself the space to feel what he needed to feel, and knowing that eventually he would find his way. For now, though, all he could do was keep moving forward, and that at least felt like a start.